Why can't I remember my childhood? At a party, someone asked about our most embarrassing childhood moments, and everyone had stories, but when they looked at me, I had nothing. I don't really remember being a kid, I said. Like what part? Mia asked. Any of it, I said. My first memory is starting high school. Everyone laughed until they realized I was serious, and then Mia said, "That's not normal," and suddenly I realized maybe it wasn't. Everyone else could remember being 7, 8, 9 years old. They had first day of school stories and childhood friends and favorite teachers. I had nothing but black space where those memories should be. That night I tried to remember being a kid and came up empty. I knew facts my mom had told me, like we'd lived in Ohio and I'd broken my arm when I was 8, but I couldn't actually remember any of it happening. I thought maybe trauma was blocking everything, which is what Google said could happen. So I went to therapy, but the doctor said trauma usually blocks specific memories, not your entire childhood. She sent me to a hypnotherapist who tried to regress me, but when he told me to go back to age 10, all I saw was black. Age 5 was still black, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. Your mind isn't blocking memories, he said. They're absent. That word absent scared me more than blocked. Blocked meant they were still there somewhere. Absent was like they'd never even existed. The neurologist found nothing wrong with my brain on the MRI, but suggested looking at old photos to trigger memories. My parents had boxes of them showing me at birthdays and Christmas and school plays, but watching them was like watching a stranger who happened to look like a younger me. "You love this song," my mom said, showing me a video of 6-year-old me singing something over and over. "I don't recognize it at all," I said. Her face went pale because apparently I'd sung it every single day for 2 years. She looked at me like I'd become a stranger, and maybe I had. I went to my old elementary school, but walking through classrooms where I'd supposedly spent years felt like touring a random school. The principal showed me report cards with perfect attendance and teachers' comments about what a happy child I'd been. Happy. I'd been happy and couldn't remember any of it. I started getting desperate and called childhood friends from my mom's old address book. They all mentioned the same thing. After the summer I turned 9, I was different, quieter. One girl, Anna, said I'd acted like I didn't know her when school started that fall. "You looked right through me," she said, "like we'd never been best friends." Then my mom mentioned something odd about that summer when I was 9. "You came back different from visiting your dad. You used to be so loud and suddenly you barely talked." My parents had divorced when I was 8, and I'd spent summers with my dad but couldn't remember any of them. When I called him and told him I had no memories before age 14, he was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. "Maybe that's for the best," he finally said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "I have to go." I drove to his house without calling first, and he looked terrified when he opened the door. I pushed past him and noticed all the family photos stopped at a certain point. Every picture of me as a child was gone, and the walls had light rectangles where frames used to hang. "Where are the photos?" I asked. "I had to remove them," he said. "Part of the agreement." In his storage room, I found a locked filing cabinet. He begged me not to break it open, but I did anyway, and found court documents from when I was 9, custody papers and psychiatric evaluations with words like dissociative and selective amnesia and recommended treatment. One report mentioned I'd been found at a park 3 towns over with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Another mentioned persistent claims of experiences that could not have occurred. A teacher had reported I'd been drawing the same picture over and over of something that disturbed her so much she'd called social services. "What happened to me?" I asked. "You don't want to know," he said. "Tell me," I said. "I can't. The court said if you remembered on your own that was one thing, but we couldn't tell you." "Agreement with who?" I asked. "Your mom knows," he said. "Ask her about Dr. Brennan." I drove home and confronted my mom, who went white when I mentioned Dr. Brennan. "We were trying to protect you," she said, starting to cry. "We signed papers saying we couldn't tell you because it could trigger something." "Trigger what?" I asked. "The doctor said if you remembered too fast it could cause another incident," she said. "Like the one that made us take you to Dr. Brennan in the first place." She gave me a key to a locked trunk in the attic that contained toys I didn't recognize and clothes that must have been mine, and at the bottom, a journal in my handwriting from when I was 9. The entries started normal but then got strange, mentioning things that scared me without saying what they were. Just, "It happened again, and I can't tell anyone, and they won't believe me," over and over, getting more frantic. The handwriting got messier until some pages were just the same sentence written hundreds of times. "I want to forget." The last entry stopped mid-sentence. "Today, something strange happened. A man came to school and said," but the rest of the page was torn out. I sat on that attic floor for maybe an hour just staring at the torn page, trying to make sense of what I was holding. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I needed help with this. Real professional help. Not just someone telling me my brain looked fine on a scan. I remembered Dr. Whitehead had mentioned a trauma specialist when we first met, someone who worked with memory issues and dissociative stuff. I pulled out my phone and searched through my old emails until I found her name, Reese Shields. I called her office right there from the attic, and somehow got an emergency appointment for the next morning. The receptionist asked if I was in crisis, and I said I didn't know, which I guess was answer enough because she fit me in. I brought the journal and all the documents I'd photographed from my dad's filing cabinet. Reese's office was smaller than I expected, with soft lighting and tissues on every surface like she knew people cried there a lot. She had me sit down and then asked me to walk her through everything, starting from the party. I talked for probably 40 minutes straight, showing her the journal entries, the court papers, the psychiatric evaluations. She read through it all carefully, making notes, and her face stayed calm and professional the whole time. When I finished, she looked at me and said, we needed to talk about safety before we did anything else. She asked if I'd thought about hurting myself, and I said no, I just wanted answers. She asked if I was sleeping and eating, and I admitted not really. We spent the rest of that first session just creating what she called a safety plan, phone numbers to call if I started panicking, grounding techniques to use if memories started coming back, agreements about not pushing myself too hard. She was the first person who treated this like something dangerous instead of just interesting. She made me promise to check in with her twice a week minimum and to not read anything about my case alone. I agreed, because having someone take this seriously felt like a relief. That night, I started researching Dr. Brennan, trying to figure out who this person was that my parents had signed agreements with. I found 3 psychiatrists with that last name who practiced in Ohio around the right time. One was retired, one had moved to California, and one had changed her practice name but still worked in the same area. Dr. Maeve York. The dates lined up perfectly with when I was 9. I called her office the next morning, and when I said my name, there was this long pause before the receptionist asked me to hold. She came back and said, Dr. York couldn't discuss former patients without proper authorization, but that I could submit a formal request through legal channels. The fact that she didn't just say she'd never heard of me told me everything. This was the right person. My work started falling apart because I couldn't focus on anything except this mystery. I'd sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets but thinking about torn journal pages and missing photos and agreements my parents signed. My boss called me into his office and asked if everything was okay at home. I made up something vague about family stress, and he gave me a warning about meeting deadlines. I'd never gotten a warning before. I was always the reliable one, but now I couldn't think about anything except the black hole where my childhood should be. I asked my mom if she'd support me trying to get the court records unsealed, and after a really long conversation where she cried a lot, she said yes. She said she'd been carrying guilt about this for years, and maybe it was time to stop hiding. When I asked my dad the same thing, he refused completely. He said I was going to ruin everything they'd worked to protect me from, and that some doors should stay closed. The fact that my own parents couldn't even agree on whether I deserved to know my own history made me feel completely alone in this. I reached out to Evie Lewis, one of the childhood friends whose number I'd found in my mom's address book. She agreed to meet me for coffee, and I explained what I was trying to figure out. She was kind about it, patient while I stumbled through my questions. She confirmed what Anna had said, that I'd changed completely after that summer when I was 9. She described how I used to be outgoing and funny, always the first one to suggest games at recess, and then I came back to the school like someone had turned my volume off. She said I stopped joining games and started spending lunch periods alone in the library. She remembered asking me once if I was okay, and I'd just looked at her like I didn't understand the question. I met with Reese again, and she taught me grounding techniques, ways to calm myself down if I started panicking. She had me start keeping a daily journal about how I was feeling and coping. She kept emphasizing that this investigation might not give me the answers I wanted, and that I needed to be prepared for partial information or even dead ends. She said my goal should be learning to live well despite the gaps, not filling every gap perfectly. I didn't want to hear that, but I knew she was probably right. I went back to my old elementary school and asked Hannah Swift, the principal, if I could walk around the playground area. I brought Evie with me because being there alone felt too overwhelming. She pointed out where we used to play, the corner of the field where we'd make up games, the tree we'd climb until teachers made us come down. I didn't remember any of it, but being there with someone who knew me then made the loss feel more real somehow. After about 20 minutes, I had to leave because the frustration of not remembering became too much. My chest got tight, and my hands started shaking, and Evie had to help me back to my car. Hannah mentioned later that week that the school kept visitor logs from that time period. I asked if I could request access to them, and she said she'd need to check with the district's legal department, but she'd try to help. 2 weeks went by before she emailed me. She sent a heavily redacted copy of the logs from the months before my dissociative episode. Most of the names were blacked out, but one visitor showed up 3 times in the spring when I was 9. E. Caldwell, listed as a church volunteer for some after-school program. The name meant nothing to me, but when I saw it, I felt this jolt run through my whole body, like my body recognized a threat my mind couldn't access. I took the log to my next session with Reese and showed her. She asked how I felt looking at that name, and I told her about the physical reaction, the way my heart started racing even though I didn't consciously remember anything. She said that kind of somatic response was common with trauma, that bodies remember what minds forget. Mom pulled out her phone and scrolled through old videos, stopping on one that showed a little kid who must have been me sitting on a living room floor surrounded by toy cars. The kid was singing something over and over while pushing the cars around, completely absorbed in whatever game he was playing. Mom held the phone toward me with this soft smile on her face and said, "I love that song," that I sang it constantly for like 2 years straight. I watched the video twice, studying the kid's face and listening to the melody, but nothing felt familiar. The tune meant nothing to me, and watching that little boy felt like watching footage of someone else's child. Mom's smile disappeared when she realized I wasn't just being forgetful or stubborn, that I genuinely had zero connection to that moment, or that song, or that version of me. She looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like she was seeing a stranger wearing her son's face. She said I really didn't remember any of it, and it wasn't even a question, just this flat statement of fact. I shook my head, and she went very quiet, starting to gather up the photos and put them back in the boxes faster than necessary. She wouldn't meet my eyes and kept her hands busy with the pictures, and the way she was acting made me certain she knew something she wasn't telling me. I left her house feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived, because her reaction scared me almost as much as my missing memories did. The next day, I decided to visit my old elementary school, thinking maybe walking through the actual building would trigger something the photos couldn't. I called ahead, and the principal, Hannah Swift, was surprisingly nice about the whole thing when I explained I was trying to recover childhood memories. She told me to come by during lunch period when the students would be in the cafeteria and the halls would be empty. She met me at the front entrance and gave me a visitor pass, then walked with me through hallways that should have felt familiar, but didn't. We passed classrooms where I'd supposedly spent years of my life, and I felt absolutely nothing, like I was touring some random school I'd never been to before. Hannah took me to the office and pulled out old filing cabinets, showing me report cards with my name printed at the top. Perfect attendance for 3 years straight. Teacher comments about what a happy and engaged student I'd been. Notes about my participation in class activities. She pointed to one comment from my 3rd grade teacher that said I was always smiling and brought energy to the classroom. Happy. According to these records, I'd been genuinely happy here, and I couldn't remember a single moment of it. Couldn't picture a single face or classroom or recess game. The disconnect between what the records showed and what I felt made my chest tight and my hands shake. Back at my apartment that evening, I found my mom's old address book in a kitchen drawer and started calling numbers listed under my childhood friends. Most of the numbers were disconnected or belonged to people who'd moved away, but I managed to reach 3 former classmates who remembered me. All 3 of them mentioned the same thing without me even asking about it, saying that after the summer I turned 9, I was completely different. Quieter, one of them said, like someone had turned down my volume. Another girl said I acted like I didn't know her when school started that fall, even though we'd been in the same class for years. The consistency of their observations made me feel sick, because it meant something definite had happened that summer, something that changed me so much that even kids my age noticed it. I called Anna next, the girl my mom had said was my best friend all through elementary school. She remembered the change most clearly and described it in detail that made my skin feel cold. She said I looked right through her that first day of 4th grade, like we'd never spent 3 years having sleepovers and sharing secrets at recess. It was like someone replaced you with a copy that didn't have your memories installed, she said, and her exact words made me want to throw up. She remembered asking me once if I was okay, and I just stared at her like I didn't understand the question. She said after a few weeks of me acting like a stranger, she stopped trying to be my friend because it hurt too much. That evening I went back to my mom's house and asked her directly about the summer I turned 9. Her whole face changed when I brought it up, getting this tight, pinched look like I'd touched something painful. She admitted I came back different from visiting my dad that summer, said I used to be so loud and energetic, and suddenly I barely talked. They thought it was just me adjusting to the divorce, she said, but it never really went back to normal. I asked what she meant by different, and she wouldn't give me specifics, just kept saying I was quieter and more withdrawn. When I pushed for more details, she changed the subject and started asking about my classes, making it obvious she didn't want to talk about it anymore. I called my dad for the first time in months, my hands shaking while the phone rang. When I told him I had no memories from before age 14, The silence on the line stretched. So long I actually checked my screen to see if the call had dropped. Finally he spoke and said, "Maybe that's for the best," his voice sounding strained and weird. I asked what he meant by that, and he said nothing. He had to go, then hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, because that comment implied he knew exactly why I couldn't remember and thought it was better this way. That, for the best comment, kept me awake all night, my mind going in circles trying to figure out what he meant. By Sunday morning, I couldn't take it anymore and got in my car without calling first, driving 2 hours to his house. When he opened the door and saw me standing on his porch, his face went completely pale, and he actually looked scared, like I was the last person he wanted to see. I pushed past him into the house before he could tell me to leave. The first thing I noticed was that all the family photos were gone from the walls. There were light rectangles on the paint, where frames used to hang, and the bookshelf that used to hold photo albums was completely empty. I asked where all the pictures of me were, and he wouldn't look at me directly, just stared at the floor and said he had to remove them. I asked what agreement he meant, and he just kept shaking his head and saying he couldn't talk about it. I started opening closets in the hallway, pulling things out, checking behind boxes. He followed me saying, "Please don't do this. Please just leave it alone," but I kept searching. In his storage room, I found a filing cabinet pushed against the back wall with a lock on it. I told him to open it, and he actually backed up like I'd threatened him. He said he couldn't do that, said I didn't understand what I was asking for. That made me more sure I needed to see what was inside. I went to his garage and grabbed a screwdriver from his workbench. When I came back, he was standing in the doorway of the storage room, looking like he might actually start crying. I jammed the screwdriver into the lock and twisted hard until something snapped. He made this sound like a wounded animal but didn't try to stop me. Inside were manila folders stacked neatly, and I pulled out the first one with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Court documents from when I was 9 years old, custody papers with both my parents' names, psychiatric evaluations with my name at the top, legal agreements with words jumping out at me like dissociative episode and selective amnesia and recommended treatment protocol. I spread the papers across his storage room floor and started reading everything. One evaluation described how I'd been found at a park 3 towns over on a Tuesday afternoon. The school had called my mom when I didn't show up after lunch. Police found me sitting on a bench with no memory of leaving school or how I got there. The report said I couldn't explain where I'd been or what I was doing. Another document mentioned persistent claims of experiences that could not have occurred and recommendations for intensive therapy to address reality testing. A teacher's report from my school described me drawing the same picture over and over during class. She said the drawing disturbed her enough to call social services, but the actual picture wasn't included in the file. Just a description saying the image contained elements inconsistent with normal child development. I looked up at my dad holding these papers and asked what happened to me. He was crying now, actual tears running down his face, and he said, "I didn't want to know." I said, "Yes, I do. I absolutely do want to know," but he shook his head hard. He said the court decided if I remembered on my own, that was one thing, but they couldn't tell me. He said they signed papers promising not to discuss it. I asked who made them sign papers, and he said the doctors and the lawyers and everyone involved. I kept digging through the folders and found a document referencing the agreement with Dr. Brennan regarding treatment and disclosure, with both my parents' signatures at the bottom. I asked who Dr. Brennan was, and my dad looked like I'd just punched him in the stomach. He said I should ask my mom because she knew more about it than him. He said she was the one who found the doctor and made all the arrangements. Then he said, "Please don't push this." Said some things are better left alone. Said I'd been fine all these years, and why did I need to dig it all up now? I took my phone out and photographed every page in that cabinet. He watched me do it and didn't try to stop me anymore. I drove straight back to my mom's house with my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. When I walked in and said, "Dr. Brennan," her face went completely white, and she had to sit down on the couch. She started crying and said they were trying to protect me. She said they signed papers saying they couldn't tell me because the doctors said if I remembered too fast it could cause another incident. I asked what kind of incident, and she said like the one that made them take me to Dr. Brennan in the first place. She said I'd completely shut down, stopped talking, stopped eating, just sat in my room staring at the wall. She said Dr. Brennan was the only one who could help me. She disappeared upstairs, and I heard her moving things around up there. When she came back, she was holding a small key, and her hands were shaking as she pressed it into mine. She said there was a trunk in the attic that had some of my things from back then. She said the doctors told her to keep certain items in case they were needed later for treatment. She said maybe I was ready now. She didn't know anymore. I went up to the attic and found an old trunk shoved in the corner under some boxes. The lock was stiff, but the key turned and I opened it with hands that wouldn't stay steady. Inside were toys I didn't recognize, a stuffed bear with one eye missing, building blocks, some kind of action figure, clothes that must have been mine, small shirts and pants folded neatly. At the very bottom was a journal with my name written on the cover in child's handwriting. I sat down right there on the attic floor and opened it. The first entries were normal kid stuff about school and friends and what I had for lunch, talking about playing at recess and watching cartoons and being excited for my birthday. Then about halfway through the journal, the entries changed. They got strange and scared. It happened again, appeared over and over without explaining what it was. I can't tell anyone filled page after page. They won't believe me written in handwriting that got messier and more frantic. The entries got shorter and more repetitive, like whoever wrote them was falling apart. The last few pages were just the same sentence written hundreds of times, getting bigger and more desperate. I want to forget. I want to forget. I want to forget. The letters got so big toward the end, they took up whole pages. The final entry stopped mid-sentence. Today, something strange happened. A man came to the school and said, and then the rest of the page was torn out, leaving a ragged edge. I sat there on the attic floor holding that journal, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I actually wanted to remember what happened to that scared 9-year-old who wished so hard to forget that apparently his wish came true. I spent the next 2 days carrying that journal around like it might explode if I put it down wrong. I called Dr. Whitehead and asked if he knew anyone who specialized in trauma and memory stuff specifically. He gave me a name, Reese Shields, and said she'd helped other patients with really complicated cases. I called her office and got an appointment for Thursday afternoon. When I showed up, she had this calm office with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that made me feel slightly less like I was losing my mind. I handed her the journal and the court documents I'd photographed, and she spent almost 20 minutes just reading through everything while I sat there trying not to bounce my leg too hard. When she finally looked up, her expression was this mix of concern and something else I couldn't quite read. She said we needed to talk about safety first, that recovering memories wasn't always the right goal. Sometimes learning to function and feel okay mattered more than filling in every blank space. I told her I just wanted to know what happened to me, and she nodded, but said we'd need to be really careful about how we approach this. The rest of that first session was all about setting up what she called a safety plan. We wrote down that I'd check in with her twice a week, no matter what. We talked about what I should do if I started having panic attacks, or if memories came back suddenly. She gave me her emergency number and made me promise I wouldn't push myself past certain limits she helped me identify. I'd never had a therapist treat this whole thing like it was actually dangerous before. Everyone else had been curious or sympathetic, but Reese acted like I was standing at the edge of something that could really hurt me if I wasn't careful. It made me feel both more scared and weirdly more safe at the same time. She was taking this seriously, in a way that validated how terrified I actually felt. Over the next week, I became obsessed with figuring out who Dr. Brennan really was. I searched online for psychiatrists with that name who'd practiced in Ohio around the time I was 9. I found 3 different possibilities, but when I started cross-referencing with the dates on the court documents, only one timeline made sense. Dr. Maeve York had apparently changed her practice name at some point, but all the other details matched. The location was right, the specialty was right, the time period was right. I spent hours going through old professional directories and archived websites until I was pretty sure I'd found the right person. I called Dr. York's office on a Tuesday morning, and when the receptionist answered, I explained who I was and why I was calling. There was this really long pause where I thought maybe she'd hung up, and then she asked me to hold. I waited for what felt like forever, listening to terrible hold music. When someone came back on the line, it was a different voice, more careful and professional. She said she couldn't confirm or deny treating me without a court order because of specific legal restrictions on my case. She wouldn't say anything else, but the fact that she didn't just tell me I had the wrong person meant I'd found her. I asked if there was any way to get those restrictions lifted, and she said I'd need to petition the court. Then she ended the call pretty quickly. My work started falling apart because I couldn't focus on anything except this mystery taking over my life. I missed 2 deadlines in 1 week, which had never happened before. My boss pulled me aside on Friday afternoon and asked if everything was okay at home. I made up something vague about family stress, and he gave me this look that was half concerned and half annoyed. He said he needed me to get back on track because other people were depending on me to do my part. It was the first warning I'd ever gotten at this job, and I felt sick about it, but I also couldn't make myself care as much as I should have. All I could think about was the black hole where my childhood used to be. I drove to my mom's house that weekend and asked if she'd support me trying to get the court records unsealed. We sat at her kitchen table for over an hour talking about it. She finally agreed, saying maybe I had a right to know my own history, even if it scared her. When I called my dad to ask the same thing, he refused immediately. He said I was going to ruin everything they'd worked so hard to protect me from, that some doors should stay closed. I tried to explain that not knowing was killing me, but he just kept saying no. The fact that my own parents couldn't agree on whether I deserved to know what happened to me made me feel completely alone in this. I found Evie Lewis's number in my mom's old address book and called to ask if she'd meet me for coffee. She agreed pretty easily, and we met at a place near her work on Wednesday. She was patient while I explained what I was trying to figure out, and she confirmed everything I'd heard from other people. She said I used to be really outgoing and funny, always making jokes and organizing games at recess. Then after that summer, I came back to the school completely different, like someone had turned my volume all the way down. She remembered I stopped playing with everyone at recess and started spending lunch periods alone in the library instead. Hearing her describe the before and after versions of me made the loss feel even more real. My next session with Reese focused on learning actual techniques for managing the anxiety that was eating me alive. She taught me grounding exercises, ways to breathe when I felt panic starting, stuff to do with my hands when my brain was spinning too fast. She also had me start keeping a daily journal about how I was feeling and coping, not about memories, but about right now. She kept emphasizing that this investigation might not give me the answers I wanted, that I needed to prepare myself for partial information or even total dead ends. She said my goal should be learning to live well despite the gaps, not filling every gap perfectly. I understood what she meant, but I wasn't ready to accept it yet. I called Hannah at my old elementary school and asked if I could come back to see the playground area. She said that would be fine, and I asked Evie if she'd come with me. We met there on Saturday morning and walked around the outside of the building while Evie pointed out where we used to play. She showed me the corner where we'd built forts out of bark chips, and the monkey bars where I'd apparently been able to do flips. I didn't remember any of it, but being there with someone who'd actually known me then made the loss feel more solid somehow. After about 20 minutes, I had to leave because the frustration was getting too intense. My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking, and I couldn't stand being in a place where I should have 1,000 memories, but had nothing. Hannah mentioned in a follow-up email that the school kept visitor logs from back then. I asked if I could request access to them, and she said she'd need to check with the district's legal department, but she'd try to help. 2 weeks went by before she emailed me again with a PDF attachment. The logs were heavily redacted with black bars covering most of the information, but I could see dates and a few names. One name appeared 3 times in the spring when I was 9, listed as a church volunteer for some after-school program, E.O. Caldwell. The name meant absolutely nothing to me, but when I read it, I felt this jolt in my chest, like my body recognized something my brain couldn't access. I bring the log to my next session with Reese and slide it across her desk. She studies the name E. Caldwell for a long minute, while I sit there with my hands clenched in my lap. My chest feels tight just looking at those letters on the page. She asks how I feel seeing the name, and I tell her I don't know the person at all, but something in my body reacts like it recognizes danger. She nods and makes notes about somatic memory, explaining that sometimes our bodies remember threats, even when our conscious minds don't. She says this is actually good information, that my physical reaction confirms something significant happened with this person. I ask what I should do next, and she suggests talking to my mom about the church program before doing anything else. I need more context before I can figure out what this name means. I drive to my mom's house that same afternoon without calling first, because I know if I wait, I'll lose my nerve. She's in the kitchen when I arrive, and her face goes careful when she sees my expression. I ask her about the church volunteer program from when I was 9, and she sits down at the table like her legs won't hold her anymore. She admits I was part of an after-school music and art program run by volunteers from their church. I loved it at first, she says. Always came home excited about what songs they'd learned or what pictures they'd drawn. Then around March or April, I started making excuses not to go. Said I had too much homework or my stomach hurt or I was too tired. She thought I was just being moody about the divorce, acting out because of the family stress. She didn't push it because everything felt hard that year, and she figured I'd tell her if something was really wrong. Her guilt is written all over her face, and I feel this weird split between wanting to be angry that she didn't see the signs and feeling sorry for her because she clearly had no idea what was happening. She keeps saying she should have known, should have asked more questions, should have made me tell her why I didn't want to go anymore. I tell her she couldn't have known if I didn't tell her, but the words feel hollow because part of me does blame her for missing it. 3 nights later, my phone rings at almost midnight and it's my dad. I can tell immediately he's drunk from the way his words blur together. He starts rambling about the settlement money and how it was supposed to make everything okay. They paid for all the therapy, he says, voice getting louder. They promised if we kept quiet and followed the treatment plan, you'd be fine. And you were fine, weren't you? You grew up normal. I ask who they are, but he just keeps talking like he didn't hear me. Says the lawyers explained that dragging a 9-year-old through testimony and court proceedings would do more damage than just accepting the money and moving forward. Says they thought they were protecting me by signing those papers. I ask again who paid the settlement and who made those promises, but he goes quiet for a long moment. Then he says he shouldn't be talking about this and hangs up before I can say anything else. I try calling back twice, but it goes straight to voicemail. The next morning, I look up the church my parents attended when I was a kid and find a phone number online. A receptionist answers, and I explain, I'm trying to get information about volunteer programs they ran about 15 years ago. She transfers me to someone in their public relations office who gives me this very smooth, very rehearsed response about how they take child safety seriously and have extensive policies and procedures in place. When I mention the specific year and the name Ia Caldwell from the visitor logs, her tone changes. She says she'll have someone call me back to discuss my concerns. I wait 3 days, but no one ever calls. I try the main number again and get transferred to the same PR person who now says they can't discuss personnel matters or past programs without a formal legal request. The wall between me and any real information feels impossible to break through. These institutions protect themselves first, and I'm just one person asking questions they clearly don't want to answer. At my next session, I tell Reese about the dead ends, and she suggests I talk to an attorney about my options. She knows someone at a community legal clinic that offers free consultations for people who can't afford regular lawyers. I make an appointment for the following week and meet with an attorney named Riker Meadows in a small office that smells like old coffee and copy paper. He's younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, and he listens carefully while I explain the whole situation. He says I have a legal right to petition the court to unseal my own juvenile psychiatric records. It's not guaranteed to work, because judges have a lot of discretion with sealed records, but I have standing to ask as the subject of those records. He explains the process and the timeline, warning me it could take months and might not succeed. But at least it's something I can actually do instead of just hitting walls everywhere I turn. Riker helps me draft a petition over the next 2 weeks. We meet 3 times to work on the language, explaining why I need access to my own records for mental health treatment and personal understanding. He has me write a statement about how not knowing my history is affecting my current mental health and functioning. Reese writes a supporting letter emphasizing that supervised access through a therapist would be appropriate and that the information could be important for my ongoing treatment. Filing the petition feels like taking real action after weeks of just spinning my wheels and getting nowhere. Riker files it at the courthouse, and we get a case number and a hearing date set for 6 weeks out. Walking out of the courthouse with that receipt in my hand makes me feel like I'm finally doing something concrete, instead of just asking questions no one wants to answer. The waiting period is worse than I expected. I can't sleep more than a few hours at a time because my brain won't shut off. Every time I close my eyes, I think about what might be in those records and what I might learn about myself. My anxiety gets so bad that Reese increases our sessions to twice a week. She teaches me more grounding techniques and breathing exercises and ways to interrupt the spiral when my thoughts start racing. She also keeps preparing me for the possibility that the records might not tell me everything I want to know. Trauma documentation isn't usually a clear narrative, she explains. It's notes and observations and clinical language that might raise more questions than it answers. She says I'm looking for a story that makes sense of everything, but real life doesn't usually work that way. I understand what she's saying, but I'm not ready to accept that I might never get the full picture. Evie sends me a message one afternoon with a photo attached. It's the 2 of us as kids, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with our arms around each other and huge smiles on our faces. We're standing in front of a playground, and I'm holding what looks like a popsicle. I stare at that little boy's face for a long time, trying to find some recognition or connection. Something in my chest aches, looking at how happy we both look, how normal and carefree everything appears in that frozen moment. My body seems to hold grief my mind can't access, and I end up crying without really understanding why. I don't remember that day or that playground or what flavor popsicle I was eating, but seeing proof that I was once that happy kid who had a best friend and normal childhood experiences makes the loss feel more real somehow. I save the photo to my phone and look at it probably a dozen times that day. My mom calls and asks if we can meet for coffee. When we sit down, she looks like she hasn't been sleeping either. She tells me she needs to explain something about the settlement money. It was specifically earmarked for my therapy and treatment, she says, not just general damages. They had to sign agreements not to discuss what happened or pursue any legal action beyond what was already settled. The lawyers told them that dragging me through testimony and trials would be worse than just getting me help and moving forward. They thought they were doing the right thing, choosing my well-being over justice or accountability. She says the guilt has been eating her alive for years, wondering if they made the wrong choice, wondering if keeping quiet hurt me more than speaking up would have. I can see how much this has cost her, carrying this secret and this guilt for so long. Part of me wants to tell her it's okay, but I can't quite get the words out because I don't know if it is okay. The court notification goes out, and both my parents receive copies since they were the original guardians on the case. My dad calls that same evening, angry in a way I've rarely heard from him. He says I'm opening wounds that should stay closed, that I'm going to hurt myself and everyone else by digging this up. Says some things are better left buried, and I need to trust that they made the right decisions back then. My mom calls an hour later with a completely different tone, supportive but scared. She asks if I'm sure I'm ready for whatever I might learn, if I've really thought through what it might mean to know the truth. The tension in my family reaches a point where it feels like something has to break. We can't keep going like this, with everyone afraid of what I might discover and what it might do to all of us. Reese schedules 3 sessions before the hearing date to work on safety planning. We sit in her office, and she pulls out a worksheet about managing overwhelming information. She asks what I'll do if reading the records triggers a panic attack or flashback. I tell her I'll use the grounding techniques she taught me, the 5 senses thing where I name what I can see and touch and hear. She makes me write down phone numbers I can call if things get bad, including the crisis line and her emergency number. We talk about who should be with me when I first learn what happened. I want to read everything alone, but she says that's not safe. That trauma information can hit harder than people expect. She makes me promise I won't look at any records without her reviewing them first. I agree, even though part of me hates giving up that control. She explains that she'll read everything, process it professionally, then decide what to share and how to share it in a way that won't re-traumatize me. It makes sense, but I still feel like a kid being protected from scary movies. The courthouse is smaller than I expected, just a regular building with metal detectors and bored security guards. Riker meets me in the lobby, and we go through security together. My mom is already sitting in the back row of the courtroom when we walk in. She gives me a small wave but doesn't come over. I asked my dad to come, but he sent a text this morning saying he couldn't face it. The judge is a woman in her 50s who looks tired. She reads through our petition while Riker and I sit at a table in front. The courtroom is almost empty except for my mom and a court reporter. The judge asks me to stand and explain why I want the records unsealed. My voice shakes when I start talking, but I push through. I tell her about the party where I realized I couldn't remember anything before high school. I explain how the blank space in my memory is like missing a huge part of who I am. I say that not knowing what happened is worse than knowing could ever be, that I can't build a life on top of a foundation full of holes. She asks if I understand the records might contain disturbing information about trauma. I tell her I understand, but that living with questions is its own kind of trauma. The judge takes off her glasses and rubs her eyes. She says she's reviewed the original case file and the treatment records from when I was 9. She says the court's primary concern back then was my well-being and stability. She asks Riker about my current mental health treatment. He explains I'm working with a trauma specialist and have safety plans in place. The judge looks at me for a long moment. Then she says she's going to order a partial release of records to my current therapist, not directly to me. I feel my stomach drop because I wanted to see everything myself. The judge explains that given the nature of the original trauma and my documented dissociative episodes, releasing raw records directly to me could be harmful. She says my therapist can review the material and determine what's appropriate to share and how to share it safely. Riker squeezes my shoulder and whispers that this is actually a good outcome. I don't feel like it's good. I feel like everyone still thinks I need to be protected from my own history. After the hearing, Reese calls me to discuss the judge's order. She received the official notification and explains this is actually the best result we could have hoped for. She says getting the records released at all is huge, and having them come to her first means she can help me process the information in stages instead of getting hit with everything at once. I tell her I'm frustrated that I still can't just know the truth directly. She reminds me that my 9-year-old self was so desperate to forget that the therapy worked completely. She says that level of dissociation doesn't happen from small things, and whatever I'm about to learn will be hard to integrate. I ask how long until she gets the records. She says probably 2 weeks for the court to process everything and send the files over. Those 2 weeks are the longest of my life. I can't focus on work and end up taking some personal days. I keep imagining different scenarios of what might be in those records. Maybe someone hurt me physically. Maybe I saw something terrible. Maybe I did something terrible and blocked it out. My mind spins through possibilities, and none of them feel right, but all of them feel possible. I barely sleep, and when I do, I have dreams about that music room, even though I don't actually remember it. Reese checks in with me every few days to make sure I'm okay. I lie and say I'm fine, because I don't want her to think I can't handle this. Finally, she texts that the records arrived and asks me to come in for a session. When I get to her office, there's a manila folder on her desk. She's already read through everything. I can tell because she has that careful, measured look that therapists get when they're about to tell you something hard. I sit down, and my hands are sweating. She says she wants to walk me through what the records show and that we can stop any time if it becomes too much. I nod, and she opens the folder. She explains that the records document a significant dissociative episode I had after something happened in the church music program. The file doesn't contain explicit allegations about what occurred. There's just documentation that I became nonverbal, was found far from home with no memory of how I got there, and showed signs of severe psychological distress. The treatment plan focused on stabilization and safety rather than trying to recover the memories. That's why I don't remember, she explains. The therapy was designed to help me forget and move forward, not to process and integrate the trauma. She turns to another page and shows me a note from a mandatory reporter at my elementary school. The teacher documented concerns about my drawings and behavior changes in the weeks before the dissociative episode. The note mentions a pastor's aide C, but doesn't provide more context about who that was or what happened. Reese says the records suggest something significant occurred, but that the evidence wasn't clear enough for criminal charges. That's likely why my parents were pressured into accepting a settlement and signing the NDA instead of pursuing justice through the courts. The church probably wanted to avoid a public scandal, and my parents wanted to protect me from a traumatic legal process. I feel anger rising in my chest like heat. Whoever hurt me got away with it completely. They probably went on with their life while I lost my entire childhood. My parents chose money and silence over making sure this person faced consequences. Reese must see the anger on my face because she leans forward. She says gently that my parents chose my mental health over a traumatic legal process. She points out that 9-year-old me was so desperate to forget that the treatment actually worked. She says the words that stick in my head. You got what you wished for. Now we have to decide if undoing that wish serves you. I don't know how to answer that because part of me still wants to know everything, but another part wonders if she's right. I ask if I can visit the music room at my old school. I need to see if being there triggers any actual memories, or if it's just empty space like everything else. Reese thinks about it, then agrees to come with me for what she calls supervised exposure. She contacts Hannah Swift at the school and arranges for us to visit on a Saturday when the building is empty. When we pull into the parking lot, I feel my heart start beating faster, even though consciously, I don't remember anything about this place. Hannah meets us at the front door and unlocks it. She leads us down a hallway toward the music room. With each step closer, my hands start sweating more. My breathing gets shallow. Reese notices and asks if I want to slow down. I shake my head and keep walking. When we reach the hallway outside the music room, my whole body feels wrong. My heart is racing and my hands are shaking and I feel like I might throw up. I don't remember anything specific, but my body is screaming danger. We stand in that hallway for 10 minutes while I try to breathe normally. Reese stays next to me, not touching me, but present. I try to make myself walk into the actual music room, but I can't. My legs won't move forward. Finally, I have to leave because the panic is too intense. We go back outside to the parking lot and Reese guides me through grounding exercises. She has me name 5 things I can see, 4 things I can touch, 3 things I can hear. Slowly, my breathing returns to normal. She explains that my somatic reaction confirms something significant happened in that location. My body is trying to protect me, even though my conscious mind doesn't remember the threat. She says that's not a failure. That's my nervous system doing exactly what it's supposed to do. That night, my phone rings at almost midnight. It's my dad, and for once he sounds completely sober. He apologizes for how he's handled everything, for not coming to the hearing, for keeping secrets all these years. He tells me he was scared of what happened to me, scared of losing me to the trauma, scared of lawsuits and police and having everyone in town knowing our business. He thought if they just moved forward and didn't look back, I'd be okay. He thought erasing the past would let me have a normal future. I tell him I understand, even though I'm not sure I do completely. I tell him I need to find my own way through this now, that I'm not a kid who needs protecting anymore. He says he knows, and that he's sorry it took him so long to see that. After we hang up, I sit in the dark for a while thinking about how everyone in my life has been trying to protect me from the truth, and how maybe that protection has been its own kind of harm. The next morning, I pull up the volunteer logs Hannah gave me and start cross-checking every name against old church directories I find through online archives and local library databases. E. Caldwell appears 3 times in the spring when I was 9, always listed under the music program. I search church bulletins from that year that someone digitized and posted to a local history site, and there in the April newsletter is a photo of volunteers with names listed below. E. Caldwell is actually Elias Tanaka, a guy in his 30s who went by Eli and worked as the volunteer coordinator for youth programs. I stare at his face in the grainy photo and feel nothing, no memory, just this sick feeling in my stomach that my body recognizes, even if my brain doesn't. I spend hours trying to find current information on him, but hit dead ends everywhere. His social media profiles stop around 12 years ago. Public records show he moved out of state, but then the trail goes cold. No current address, no phone number, no way to reach him. He just disappeared while I'm stuck dealing with what he did. The anger builds over the next few days until I can't sleep or focus on anything else. Finally, I sit down and write a letter I know I'll never send, addressed to Eli or C, or whoever he really was. I write about how he stole my entire childhood, how I can't remember being happy or having friends, or any of the normal things kids are supposed to have. I write about the panic attacks and the therapy, and the years my parents spent lying to me because of what he did. I write about how unfair it is that he gets to just move away and start over somewhere else while I'm left trying to piece together a past that's gone forever. I write that he took something from me that I can never get back, and he doesn't even have to face what he did. The letter fills 4 pages of angry, messy handwriting before I finally run out of things to say. At my next session, I show it to Reese, and she reads it carefully, then tells me that writing it was good, even if I never mail it, that getting the anger out on paper is better than keeping it locked inside where it eats at me. 2 days later, the church finally responds to the inquiries I made through their general contact form. A PR person sends a carefully worded email about how they take child safety very seriously and have since put in place strict background check procedures and volunteer training programs. They mention updated policies and oversight committees, but don't acknowledge anything specific about my case or what happened to me. There's no apology, no admission, no taking of responsibility, just corporate language about how they've improved things going forward. The email makes me so mad, I have to walk away from my computer. I forward it to Riker and ask if there's anything I can do legally, and he calls me back that afternoon to explain that the NDA my parents signed probably prevents me from going public with specifics. He says I could try to fight it in court, but it would be expensive and difficult, and might not even work. The church protected itself legally while leaving me with nothing. I decide to try family therapy and ask both my parents if they'll come to an intake session. My mom agrees immediately, but my dad takes 3 days to respond, finally texting that he'll be there. The first session is so awkward I almost leave twice. We sit in these uncomfortable chairs in the therapist's office, and nobody knows where to look or what to say. The therapist asks each of us to share our perspective on what happened, and my dad goes first, his voice shaking as he admits he was scared the whole time, that he felt powerless watching me fall apart and didn't know how to help. He says the doctors and lawyers told him what to do, and he just followed their advice because he was terrified of making things worse. My mom talks about the guilt she's carried for years, how she keeps replaying those months and wondering what signs she missed, whether she should have known something was wrong sooner. When it's my turn, I tell them I'm angry, but I also understand they were trying to protect me, that I know they didn't have bad intentions, even if some of their choices hurt me. The therapist helps us talk through the layers of fear and guilt and anger without everyone shutting down or walking out. Over the next week, I have 3 long conversations with Reese about my options. She lays out what pursuing charges or breaking the NDA to go public would look like, and it sounds exhausting and painful, and probably pointless. The evidence is old and mostly circumstantial. Elias is gone and might be impossible to find. Breaking the NDA could cost my parents money they don't have and drag us all through legal battles that might not lead anywhere. Reese doesn't tell me what to do, but she asks hard questions about what I'm hoping to gain and whether the cost would be worth it. Finally, I decide I'm not going to pursue charges or try to go public. It's a hard choice, and part of me feels like I'm letting him get away with it, but it's my choice to make, and I'm choosing to focus on healing instead of revenge. I tell Reese my decision, and she says she supports it, that choosing what's best for my own well-being is important, even when it feels like giving up. I send an email to Dr. Maeve York, requesting the full clinical summary of my treatment when I was 9. She responds within a day saying she'll compile her findings and recommendations and would like to meet in person to discuss them. We set up an appointment at her office for the following week. When I arrive, she's professional but warmer than I expected, not hiding behind the legal restrictions anymore. She hands me a folder with the summary and sits across from me while I look through it. The documents show her treatment approach focused on helping me function and feel safe rather than recovering memories. She explains she worked within the constraints the court and my parents set, doing what she thought would help me have a normal life. Then she looks at me directly and says she's sorry, that she did what she thought would help me function, but she understands now that choice took away my right to my own history. I don't know what to say to that, so I just nod and thank her for being honest. That weekend, I sit down with both my parents separately and tell them what kind of relationship I need going forward. I tell my mom I need complete honesty even when it's uncomfortable, that I can't have her hiding things because she thinks it's protecting me. She agrees and promises to be open with me about everything from now on. With my dad, the conversation is harder because he still wants to avoid difficult topics, but I push through his resistance and make it clear that I won't accept any more secrets or lies. I tell him if he can't be honest with me, then we can't have a real relationship, and he finally agrees that he'll try. Things aren't perfect, and probably won't be for a long time, but at least we're being real with each other, instead of pretending everything is fine. Monday morning, I meet with my boss before my shift starts, and explain that I need some time to deal with family and mental health issues. I don't give him all the details, but I'm honest that I've been struggling, and it's affecting my work. He's surprisingly understanding, and we work out a modified schedule where I reduce my hours temporarily and take some personal leave time to focus on therapy. I commit to getting my performance back on track once I have things more under control. Having that professional stability while everything else is chaos makes a huge difference in my stress level. Hannah agrees to let me do another supervised visit to the music room, and this time Reese comes with me again. We walk down the same hallway, and I feel my heart start racing like before, but I make myself keep walking until we're standing in the doorway. I stay there for 15 minutes, just breathing and trying to stay calm while my body screams at me to run. I don't remember anything specific, and no memories come flooding back, but I can tolerate being in the space without completely falling apart. When we leave, Reese tells me this is real progress, that exposure work is about building tolerance, not recovering memories. I want to feel proud of myself, but mostly I just feel tired and disappointed that there was no big breakthrough. The family therapy sessions continue every week, and slowly we start working through everything. My dad brings a box of old photos he'd hidden away, the ones he had to remove from his walls as part of the agreement. We sit in the therapist's office and go through them together, while he tells me stories about the happy kid I was. He points to a picture of me at a baseball game and describes how excited I got every time someone hit the ball. He shows me photos from a camping trip and talks about how I wouldn't stop asking questions about every plant and animal we saw. I still don't remember any of it, but hearing the stories makes me feel less disconnected from that lost child, like maybe he was real, even if I can't access him anymore. 2 weeks later, Reese gives me information about a support group that meets Thursday nights at a community center downtown. I show up nervous and sit in a circle with 8 other people who all have some kind of memory problem or trauma history. A woman named Sarah talks about not remembering anything before age 12 after a car accident. A guy describes having gaps in his memory from ages 6 to 10 that doctors say might never come back. Everyone has a different story, but the same confused grief about losing pieces of themselves. When it's my turn, I explain about the blank space where my childhood should be, and nobody looks at me like I'm crazy or broken. They just nod because they understand exactly what that feels like. After the meeting, 3 people come up to me, and we stand in the parking lot talking for almost an hour about the weird things nobody else gets, like how family photos feel like looking at strangers, or how everyone else's childhood stories make you feel left out of your own life. I leave feeling less alone than I have in months. I keep going every Thursday, and slowly I start recognizing the patterns we all share. Some people have recovered memories and some haven't, but we're all learning to build lives that work despite the gaps. One woman tells me she stopped trying to remember and started focusing on who she is now, and something about that shifts how I think about everything. 6 months after that party where this whole thing started, I'm sitting in my apartment making breakfast and realize I feel different. I still don't remember my childhood and probably never will, but I'm not constantly trying to force memories anymore. I understand what happened and why the treatment made me forget. Reese and I meet weekly, and she helps me process things as they come up. My relationship with my parents is better, because we talk honestly now instead of pretending everything is fine. My dad and I had coffee last week, and he told me stories about little kid me without the guilt weighing down every word. My mom and I are planning a trip together next month, something we haven't done in years. Work is stable again, and my boss says my performance is back to normal. I'm creating new memories now with people who matter, and I'm learning that moving forward counts more than recovering everything I lost. That's how it played out for me. But what about you? Tell me what you'd have done in that moment. I'll be reading through the comments later. You guys always make these stories 10 times better.